Thanks for tuning in to Women's Voices. My name is Genevieve Gluck, and in this episode, I speak about recent events with Jen Isaacson, a recent PhD graduate in continental philosophy who lives in London. She is the co-founder of Lesbian Labor, and you can find them on Twitter at Lesbian Labor, and myself, I'm on Twitter at Women Read Women. The contents of this conversation contain adult language and some references to sexual assault.
Hello, Genevieve. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jen?
Very good. Finally handed in my PhD and finally got my third vaccine. So
nice. Well done.
Fully up to speed with everything.
Did you get some rest after handing in your PhD?
Did. I basically had about 5 days of rest, and then I got the jab, and then I needed a couple more days of rest because of the side effects. So yeah, I had January just seems to go on forever, no matter if it's eventful or not. But yeah, so
yeah, I think it's the cold and the darkness. It always makes me feel kind of sleepy anyway. I recently launched a kind of news publication with my friend Anna called Redux with 2 X's. So I've been pretty busy with that. It's related to breaking news, but especially about gender identity topics.
Okay, well, I hope you and Anna Slatz do very well with it. I will be pitching something soon, I'm sure.
So today we're talking about the recent news involving J.K. Rowling, who submitted a complaint to Police Scotland for doxing. So in November, 3 trans rights activists stood outside of her home protesting, and they took a photo, a selfie of themselves outside of her house with her address clearly visible in the picture, and they tweeted it out. So she tweeted about how she had filed a complaint with Police Scotland. Her tweet said, "My family's address was posted on Twitter by 3 activist actors who took pictures of themselves in front of our house, carefully positioning themselves to ensure that our address was visible." She also thanked people who had reported the tweet, and she mentioned other women who have been hounded by trans activists, including Allison Bailey, Raquel Rosario Sanchez, Marion Miller, Rosie Duffield, and several others. But the result or the decision just came in last week from Police Scotland saying that they are not going to pursue the matter further.
Right. And it was for harassment, basically.
Harassment, but doxing, specifically releasing her address.
But is doxing part of the law? I don't know if that's enshrined or inscribed in law.
I don't actually know.
Maybe it would be classed as publishing someone's personal information, and like the description would be in law, but not the kind of internet term. Yeah, not surprised by the police, as we'll get onto throughout the rest of the episode. Yeah, I'm not surprised at all, actually. I'm surprised that they even entertained it. I wonder if it was the CPS that made that decision, or whether the officers just turned around and said no.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm not sure. It says police in Scotland will not charge 3 transgender rights activists. So this is from a news article from Business Insider. And it doesn't specify whether that's just the police task force or the CPS decision.
There you go. Hopefully it won't happen again, simply because there was some police involvement. And I saw that those trans activists, they locked down their accounts very quickly online. I think they deleted their Twitters eventually because of the backlash. It was such a stupid thing to do. It was so obvious that they wanted, what they all want, attention and opportunities, and that they thought this was a way to almost be heroes based on, I don't know, a 25-minute walk to a woman's house and then stand around lackadaisically with signs. I'm sure they hoped it would catapult them to fame and acting fortune, but I'm very glad it's done the opposite.
Well, I mean, that seems to be the tactic of the entire gender movement in a nutshell, right? It's by upsetting people, trolling people and upsetting them in order to get that sort of negative reaction and then capitalizing on the pushback. I mean, that's just my opinion, but we see this pattern repeating where it's just sort of trolling aggressive behavior in order to get some kind of attention.
Well, I'm surprised that they didn't open a PayPal me link immediately for the three of them. And what was really funny is one of them, I don't remember her name and it doesn't matter, is that calls themselves a non-binary trans activist and actually won an acting award for women. So all these people just want to say, okay, we'll give you an award back then. This doesn't really make any sense. And it was, I think, like last year, she's like very traditionally feminine woman, turned up to accept the award in a dress. Like, it's just sort of like, who are you kidding? And she was, I think it was in the newspapers, exposed as kind of incredibly bourgeois and this sort of thing. Whereas people will pick on J.K. Rowling for being a billionaire when she was a mother on benefits who just basically wrote some books that were very, very popular and isn't from a bourgeois background at all, unlike most trans activists. So it's just incredible.
Yeah, well, that brings us to talking about the police again. So recently, a woman named Jenny Swain, who's a former teacher, was arrested for putting up stickers in Gwent, that's in Wales. She was arrested on suspicion of having committed a hate crime for placing up these stickers, which, by the way, the stickers that you can easily find them online, it just says 3 women are killed each week by men. So it doesn't even mention gender.
I think there is another sticker that I've seen circulating that does say keep women's bathrooms single sex and has a kind of image of what looks to be a man's face with sort of painted makeup on it. I've seen the suggestion that was some of the stickers as well. But I mean, regardless, it's fine. It's also not how the law works. Hate crime, the hate factor is a aggravating aspect. So if you push someone over and it's because they're gay, you don't just get done for assault. It's then also a hate crime. You can't actually be charged with a hate crime. You're not meant to be charged with a hate crime in of itself anyway. That's my understanding. So it's incredible that the police thought to pursue this and waste their time. And, I'm not saying that all sorts of different groups in society can't be dangerous, but if you're going to pursue anyone, it probably wouldn't be a disabled grandma who sticks up stickers. I mean, it's just incredible. And to have a warrant to go to her house means that they've convinced their higher ups that this is so important, that they need to raid this woman's house as if she's a drug dealer or something. And they've stolen, apparently, one of her books. I say stolen, whatever, seized. The police have seized it. They've stolen it by Heather Brunskill Evans on transgender children. And I'm hoping it's the one that I have a chapter in. The police are reading it in the station. Being like, oh, transhumanism. Huh, what's that? But yeah, it's just incredible that the police will not act so much over genuine harm that's happening, over violent crimes, but they will find the time to ideologically pursue this. So I hope she sues the living shit out of them, honestly, because I think until people start having court cases arrive on their doorstep, I don't see that, because this is the problem, is the police have just been given carte blanche really in the UK to behave as they want, and they really do, from the classic examples of killing people and getting away with it. So, and a good example there is Sean Rigg, who was killed at Brixton Police Station, to things that are not as serious, like just being able to raid someone's home, seize some of their books and charge them with a hate crime for putting up a women's rights sticker. I mean, it's just there's no accountability. So I really hope that she gets some backing, puts in a complaint, and actually sues them for things like wrongful arrest. It is definitely possible to do that. And I just it's unfathomable that they would spend their time with this. Whereas I'll just give a personal example. A friend of mine recently, someone tried to scam her out of a deposit for a room. So it was actually someone renting the room on Airbnb, and then they put the room on another website and they pretend like they're the landlord of that room, or the landlord of the house, right? And then they take in sort of 10 deposits of £600. They've made £6,000, and at the end of the month they leave and just disappear with the money. And they're not really landlords at all. She reported it to the police, and the police just said, oh, this is a civil matter, like we're not going to do anything. And she said, no, this is called, it's fraud, and it's called false representation, and that's the particular area of law under fraud this falls under. They did nothing. So this is the thing, that you usually have to, you know, beg the police to act, and they almost won't. They just, by their own statistics, they solve 4% of crime. Occasionally after the fact, they might look into something. So if you've already been murdered, they might try and find out who did it. They certainly will do nothing to prevent someone's murder. And I just find it incredible that that's what, you know, a bunch of police were sanctioned to do one evening, which was to raid this woman's house.
Yeah, well, it's incredible too. And the amount of violent sexual crimes that are not pursued. You know, it's just kind of shocking. I saw recently, I did a Twitter thread about this where all I did was go into Google and type in avoids jail, right? So I was searching for headlines. Nearly every single headline and article and instance of this that came up was of a sex offender in the UK. There were a couple in Australia, sure, but it was mostly in the UK. And then it would be, you know, like a man who had beaten his partner. One of them was a man who beat his partner while she was pregnant and pushed her down the stairs, and he didn't get any charges. Loads of other cases, one involving a woman who was being sexually abused for years by a relative, an older relative, when she was a child, and then that man wasn't sentenced for anything either. And there's just these kinds of cases you can just see all the time not being pursued. And yet here you have a disabled woman putting up stickers, and that's the thing that you pursue. Really shows where the priorities are.
Yeah. Well, it's true what Marxists say, that the law is the dominant form of the dominant ideology. And I think that in this country, we have a really entrenched paedophile culture, sort of from the up down. So the higher you go up institutionally in society, the more those things are normalized. So the law is fundamentally absolutely part of normalizing and not punishing, as you say, all these cases of sexual offences, and even the ones against children. Very, very unlikely are they pursued, and even more likely is the man involved sent to jail. And it's just that thing where it's such a crock. And I don't fully agree with, but I can really sympathize with the defund the police people, because it does just seem like the police go around doing terrible things, either doing terrible things or overlooking terrible things. And so it's just a bit of a sham. And it's like, can we just bring this sham to an end, please? But I think there probably actually needs to be a reorganization of the police, and a gutting of it. And it's just got such a sick institutional culture of misogyny and racism. And I know that my admirable friend Jeremy Corbyn's idea back in the 70s was to democratize the police. But I don't know exactly how that would have worked, but clearly something. I just really hope there's consequences for this nonsense about arresting a woman in her home over stickering. And I think it's a judge that has to sign off on that. Maybe it's not, maybe it's just a senior police officer that has to sign off on the ability for them to enter your home, or maybe they entered her home illegally. This happens a lot as well. And I just, it's incredible. We're going to have to start having kind of advice sheets about how to deal with the police in the future, given this just frequent misconduct that keeps happening towards women's rights activists. And I hope it's a bit of a wake-up call to those feminists who, you know, are newly radicalized or haven't got a background in politics particularly, to realize that the role and function of the police in society is not the one that we all are told it is. They don't exist to help people at all.
Well, yeah, just briefly, I want to mention on that point the case of Shiori Ito, who in Japan has been a leading figure in the Me Too movement, because it's really uncommon for women in Japan to come forward with allegations of rape, but especially against men in power. So her situation was that she was raped, and she says she was drugged as well. So raped while unconscious by the bureau chief of the Tokyo Broadcasting System, Mr. Yamaguchi. But what's interesting about her case, especially as well, is that the police dropped her charges. And one reason for this, it's been speculated, is that the head of the Tokyo Police Department was a close friend and confidant of the assailant, so the accused assailant. And he, in turn, was working with the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, at the time on a biography of his life. So the police were connected to the assailant as well as to the Prime Minister, and then dropped her case. And so she had been trying to get it pursued for since 2016. So it's just, shocking levels of corruption. I mean, as you said, it's the, what did you say that Marx quote, an extension of the dominant power?
Oh yeah, I don't think it's a quote directly from Marx, but the Marxist understanding is that the law is the dominant form of the dominant ideology.
I mean, so that's great. Yeah.
It's ideology in its almost purest form, and almost always its most conservative reading. So it's so hard to shift the consensus in society to get progressive reforms, or the kind of reforms that we would want. It's always such an uphill battle. And then to get anyone to apply those laws as well correctly is another ideological battle. So, should we go to non-swatch?
To what?
The section of your show called non-swatch?
Non-swatch. Yeah. It's o'clock.
It's the clock. You spin the tombola. Which nonce are we going to discuss this evening? Yeah. Oh, you found one. You found one, right? Award-winning toddler rapist.
Yes, I do. I try to find a nonce a week. It's my goal. It sounds so awful. So recently I discovered a convicted child sex offender who has been working with this trans organization called the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. And what that organization does is they lobby for self-declared sex identity. Specifically, they provide instructions for inmates on how to change their identification and change their names. Yes.
Is this in America?
This is in America, yes. So this is based in the US. So Sylvia Rivera Law Project is based in the US, which, by the way, maybe some people are familiar with Chase Strangio from the ACLU, who's a really prominent trans activist and has said all sorts of strange things like that sex doesn't exist and so on. But this person was affiliated with and employed by the Sylvia Rivera Law Project a few years ago. So, I mean, they're all kind of interconnected. So anyway.
This man is called Xena Grandicelli. He chose that name. I'd like that the Xena, obviously in Xena Warrior Princess, my favorite show growing up as a burgeoning lesbian 11-year-old, 12-year-old, my favorite show. And then Grandicelli. So it's this like grand Italian, so she got the name Grand in there. So warrior grand. Like, could you, this guy's really trying to be a main character in his own film. So he pled guilty to 11 counts of child sexual abuse involving a 3-year-old girl in 1994. So that's his history. And now he's been welcomed wholeheartedly into the arms of the Sylvia
Rivera Law Project. But more than that, if you look at the website, he had posted a letter a few years ago that's still up on their website, where he describes how he was recruited by them while he was still in prison. He said that staff went up to the prison specifically to visit him after he started identifying as a woman in 1999. So he had been incarcerated for 5 years at this time. I can only assume that they knew what his charges were. Otherwise, that would just be grossly negligent. So,
might have asked.
So they were.
and then when he says, "Look, I shagged kids," and they go, "Oh, it's fine, it's fine. Loads of us shag kids, it's fine," and that was it. full embrace.
It doesn't matter because you're a persecuted woman, right? So he actually had spoken on the topic of women's trauma and incarceration at Columbia University, which is an Ivy League school. It's one of the top institutions in the nation. And he was invited there to be a panelist speaker on women's experiences of trauma in prison. He has won an award it's called, I know, it's ridiculous. It's called the Anti-Violence Project. And he was named a community hero.
Oh my God. It's like if someone is doing a prank, they start hamming it up more and more so that you're meant to notice at a certain point, like, wait, this is a little bit, those hidden camera shows where things start to get a bit too ridiculous and a bit too ironic, to the point where you question, is all of this really just orchestrated for a bit of a joke? It's just incredible that. So actually it's anti-violence, anti-violence project.
Yep. It's just called the Anti-Violence Project. And they posted this on Twitter about the awards ceremony where they'd honored him as a local hero. And and he's spoken at NYU as well. These are just the ones that I found. I assume that he has spoken at many other institutions in New York City.
Institutions, because as we say again, it's the top of society pushing this. I bet if he got invited to like Arizona State, he'd be like, no, I'm not speaking at that tawdry, bargain basement institution.
I don't have any personal feelings about Arizona State University. Sorry, guys.
It's not a high-ranking university in America. And I know the example because it's the one from The Sopranos suggested to the son AJ when he's not doing so well in high school. Maybe you can get into Arizona State. So I clocked it as, okay, it's not one of the best unis in America. But you know what? They're the ones where now everyone who is normal, that's where you should go to university. You need to go to university, not on the West or East Coast, not in New England probably as well. You need to go to, if I was in America, I would go to university as a young person, of 18 in Texas. And I really would. I'd be like Midwest Texas, where the normal people still are. The deplorables, the Hillary Clinton, this is what she calls people basically outside of New York and LA. She called them deplorables. These are the only people that are sensible anymore, probably.
They all carry around a gun, though, so be careful.
Well, I'm starting to understand why, given that apparently a few nonce children in America, everyone lines up to give you loads of awards and recognition. It's so incredible. I do presume that those people did look at the backstory and then they'll have just told themselves something like, oh, he served his time. Like they'll just be kind of liberals with zero values and then fully also bind to authority. So they'll say, oh, well, he served his time. That's it. We can just forget about the fact that he raped children.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. He pleaded guilty as well, So he pleaded guilty to the 11 charges against a 3-year-old girl. And he was registered as a risk level 3 sex offender, which is the highest ranking that you can get. It's the most dangerous and most recidivist. And he was barred from coming within 1,000 feet of a school.
Okay. Well, I guess NYU is not counted as a school technically, but wow.
But I did want to mention that this isn't the first time the Sylvia Rivera Law Project has promoted a child sex abuser. A few years ago in 2014, they launched a petition to pressure New York's Department of Corrections to remove the child rapist and killer Cynthia China Blast from isolated confinement. here's the thing. People might say, yes, isolated confinement is wrong, right? We could talk about that, but we could have a debate about that.
I think it's completely right. I actually think worse things should probably happen to those people.
Just a second. I'm just saying that is not particularly what the issue is here anyway, because you could have a conversation about that and on its own. The issue is that this person, Cynthia China Blast, whose real name is Luis Morales, violently and brutally raped and tortured a 13-year-old girl and then set fire to her body. And he did this as part of a gang activity, or he was doing it with a fellow gang member that had sort of blatantly racist sentiments, anti-Black sentiments as well. So, and then Laverne Cox, who is a famous American actor on the show Orange is the New Black, made a video reading a letter from Luis Morales, portraying him in a sympathetic light to try to get more attention to his case. Laverne Cox later, removed the video and tried to scrub that this had ever happened. But it's still out there.
When it made him look bad, but until then, fully willing to have male solidarity with another man, even a child rapist, even a racist, from what you say. Just I think that they can really sense that if they were in the other's position in prison, I don't know, they really identify with each other. It's so incredible to me that these men claim to identify with women and they fully identify with one another in the most egregious cases. I mean, it's just incredible what men are forgiven for and how much their sexuality is not policed in any way. Whereas disabled grandma puts a sticker up, oh, fucking nicker. Like, call the police, bang down that woman's door, arrest her, and she'll spend the night in the nick. Whereas the rest of this is like, oh no, oh, he went to prison for shagging kids. Bring him to NYU. We want to hear about his experiences in prison. Really reliable narrator here. Definitely someone we'd want to listen to on a range of topics. It's like, if you were going to bin anyone, I just think, oh, I'm really not interested in what this person thinks about how to make an omelette, it would be a paedophile. Or who you just wouldn't want to be in a room with, right? And who you'd fear, oh, they're going to really take away the credibility of my organization. Even if morally don't care, you'd think, well, we might not want an association with a man who pled guilty to 11 counts of child rape. We could go to 5, not 11. It's too bad reputationally. But what's incredible is it doesn't even damage their reputation.
No, it doesn't. So, it doesn't at all. And part of the problem is that in order to find this information, you need this person's name, because the court documents are still in his male name, Jeffrey Wilsey. And then the news reports from the time are still in his name. So he's now a community outreach member for the Sylvia Rivera Law Project and advising people how to change their names. And it's the same thing with the Luis Morales rapist, because when he changed his name, then Laverne Cox couldn't have known of his crimes without some sort of detailed investigation, right? So as soon as they change their names, all is forgiven. They get a new identity. They get all of this celebration, praise, are able to speak anywhere, and people don't know. But then they go around advocating for these laws. So his job is to basically instruct other men on how to game the system.
No, that's completely it. It is, look, this is why we just need, at the least, jail for life for sexual crimes against children. I'd probably go so far as to say the death penalty. But if we want to be nicer about it or whatever, at least put them away for life. I find it incredible that these creatures are even crawling around on the streets, and the idea that they won't reoffend is laughable, given that they're so invested in this project. I don't care. Like, I don't think these people are reformable, but especially the idea that they're reformed characters when they're then going around basically helping out men of the same stripe as they are. It's just obscene. This, lecturers, feminist women, and actually some men. A guy at Staffordshire University recently got hounded by his university about some gender critical tweets. So Staffordshire University's in Stoke-on-Trent, and that those people who are lecturers, who work there, day in, day out, they get persecuted, whereas nonces actively get invited to universities to be put on podiums to espouse their views on things.
Isn't there some ridiculous number of missing, quote unquote, missing pedophiles in the UK because they changed their name by deed poll?
Probably.
I think last year,
probably in government, to be honest.
Last year I saw a report on that where it had said 900, but I think later it was found to be much higher. So the number of missing pedophiles who changed their name was 900, but I think it's actually higher than that.
They maybe missed a zero off. I think it is probably that easy here to do that kind of thing. And as I say, it's woven into our culture to just really overlook these things. And I think one of the reasons that there are these terms like nonce is because working class communities try to protect their children to some degree. I'm not saying that some working class men aren't paedophiles. I'm pretty sure some are. But there is this real buttress against what they see as outsiders abusing like their children. And it's because there was so much child sexual abuse in the public school system. So they say that kind of 50 years ago, the majority of men in parliament were sexually abused at school. And then it was the idea that you kind of were sexually abused when you were 11 or 12 as a boy at public school. And then you did the same when you were in sixth form. When you were 17 and 18, you abused the new boys. So it really is part of ruling class culture here. And this way of trying to stigmatize it, right, with words like nonce, which means not on normal courtyard exercise, and is what used to be branded on sex offenders' doors in prison. And it's Wakefield Prison, which is my hometown, by the way, Wakefield. So this is where the word originates. It's really a way to try and, re-stigmatize paedophilia, because it's just not stigmatized enough. People pretend to jump up and down about it. Actually, no one cares. Certainly not the legal system.
Yeah, it's getting worse and worse, it seems. Well, I mean, it's hard for me to say for sure, but it seems to be getting worse when I look at things like sexology. So I don't know if you saw my report from last month about the origin of the word cis.
Okay. No, I maybe saw a headline, but I don't think I read it.
So cis was coined. Okay, so I should explain that cis is short for cisgender, which is purported to be the corresponding or opposite condition to transgender. But anyway, this sexologist had coined the term cissexual, which was then changed into cisgender. So he was a German sexologist. For the life of me, I do not know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I think it's Volkmar Sigisch. He's credited with being the person who coined this term in 1991. And it was in a paper that he wrote about transsexualism. Well, he advocates for what he calls pedosexuality and says that there's nothing inherently wrong with pedosexuality. So he frames pedophilia as an innate sexual orientation, much like Nambla and Pai tried to do. And he was doing experiments and research on adolescent sexuality in the 70s in Germany, when there was a huge push at the time to normalize pedophilia and even to get a law removed which punished sexual abuses against children under 14. I mean, they were very successful at it, unfortunately. And one of his contemporaries, this guy who coined cis, his contemporary named Helmut Kentler, famously rehomed children with pedophiles. So he would take foster children and place them in the care of pedophiles in order to try to prove that it did not harm children and that these relationships could be healthy. So yeah, that's where we get the word cis from, which kind of lines up with what you would think. I mean, considering what we're seeing.
He's another one that should be in prison for life, probably. I mean, I think originally a lot of this stuff was recognized as sexuality, whether that was then considered acceptable or not. So from what I've read in Robert Stoller, who's, a kind of as early as John Money, he describes gender identity as related to sexuality. He doesn't have really the concept of gender and gender identity going on, and he's not necessarily saying it's good at all, but it is interesting that all of this stuff actually originates in sexuality. And then I think they try to defang it a bit by making it about gender, because they're actually covering up that for these men it is about sexuality, absolutely, but they won't get away with that as much as if they claim it's about some amorphous idea of gender.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I totally think that whether it was deliberate or planned or not, replacing sex with gender in there really allowed for normalizing these kinds of paraphilic behaviors. And then to extend that to children, in order to further normalize these behaviors. It's just really awful.
So strange that almost now I think it's hard to discuss sexuality on its own, or at least in certain quarters. So back in, I think it was 2016, so over 5 years ago now, a philosopher called Jacqueline Rose wrote for the London Review of Books that gender is who you want to go to bed as. And I just thought, have we just jettisoned the whole concept of sexuality? It's so strange how much those things are being used interchangeably without explanation. And I just thought, I don't think I emailed her, but I thought to just think okay, so we're just going to not have the concept of sexuality. What are you talking about? But there is just this thing of it, there's such a cover story, just calling it all gender, as if that makes it okay, and as if that's about some kind of subjectivity about who you are in an unquestionable sense. And it's just very clearly a load of men's disgusting fetishes and paedophilic tendencies, and that they don't think there should be any boundaries around their sexuality. And a way to enable that is to pretend it's not about sexuality and call it gender.
Yeah, and then to try to include as many people in it as possible to make it look like there's nothing wrong going on here, include women, bring women into it, bring children into it, when it was overwhelmingly always in the past, and demonstrably so, a male condition.
So speaking of sexuality and how we seem to be making male sexuality boundless whilst destroying female sexuality, we can talk about the Lesbian Lives conference happening at the University of Cork, who has invited a man called Susan Stryker as a keynote speaker. And this man claims to be a lesbian, and I guess would claim to be living a lesbian life.
You know what I've just realized, Jen, is that so the trans-identified male that's been invited to this conference is named Susan Stryker, who's a pretty well-known, at least in the US, well-known academic in the field of gender. But he is a professor of gender studies at the University of Arizona. Isn't that what you just said earlier?
No, they're even infiltrating normal places and normal institutions. Oh no. Well,
yeah, anyway, Stryker was one of the first academics who sought to apply critical race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality to men, and insisting that they could become women. And he has written for Time magazine comparing the history of racial segregation to claim that women are a social construct.
And it turns out that under the former name Simon Smith, he committed several offences. No, I don't know. We don't actually know if that's true. It's probably not true. That's just a huge strata of them. But yeah, it's just incredible that this little known individual man would be invited as a keynote speaker, and this idea that lesbian lives. Obviously this man has never spent a day in his entire life as a lesbian, so he wouldn't know the first thing to say. I don't even know why he'd want to be in the room, right? Even in the audience. It's just incredible, the absolute pandering. And I think it really comes from a kind of fear around kind of deep set lesbophobia in society, where they think, we're illegitimate, first of all because we're women, second of all because we're lesbians, and we can't therefore really, how do we legitimize this conference? We'll have a man in pole position, you know, starting off the day with his keynote speech. I just find it incredible that the organizers are so detached from reality, because it's probably actual lesbian organizers doing this. I presume there's not more men at the University of Cork that also call themselves lesbians that are organizing this conference. I'm assuming it's real lesbians. And I just find it incredible how you could behave in such a damaging way towards women of your own sexual category. And I'm sure all of them are like middle-aged in the very established plus 50 way, and probably have partners and nice home lives, and have no idea that they're absolutely demolishing lesbian culture for young lesbians who are then, you know, finding it very difficult to go out and find some lesbian community at bars, or, you know, these just don't exist anymore, things like lesbian nightclubs or coffee shops, whereas they benefited from all of that over the last, you know, 30 years. It's just like pulling up the ladder behind you because they simply want to advance themselves career-wise. So I really hope that there are protests of this conference, and that people take along signs stating basic facts of reality, like a lesbian is a same-sex attracted, exclusively same-sex attracted adult human female, and things like lesbians don't have dicks, and so on. Because it's just astounding, honestly. I really feel like if people had said 10 years ago that this was happening, that this would happen, no one would have really believed it.
He's compared his penis to a dildo. So in 1993, he wrote an essay called Performing Transgender Rage, where he described himself as a Harley straddling, dildo packing leather dyke from hell. Which we see this constantly, right? Where it's like, well, if women use sex toys, why don't they just accept a penis? What's there's no difference, they'll say, you know, which is just.
Yeah. Why is this guy not going around having sex with other men that call themselves lesbians? That's the question. I presume he's not. Yeah, I mean, it's also just that thing where like they fully well know the difference. It's just about kind of enabling rape culture. And it's so pornographic, this idea of like, yeah, leather dyke on a Harley Davidson, like dildo packing, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, okay, we get the scene and we get the genre this is from. Obviously, this guy, I would put money on him being into BDSM too. No big surprise. And it's just also fucking cliche and actually played out and tired. And it's also just shows you how stupid, you know, men think women are, that we can't see this stuff coming a mile off. It's funny, actually, when I was at Goldsmiths, I had a lecturer that called himself Louise, that also dressed in leather and looked like a tattooed biker and considered himself a lesbian. And in a similar sense, he used his trans identity to shield himself from putting his behavior beyond criticism. So he started sleeping with a 19-year-old student of his, and he didn't get in any shit whatsoever. She just had to change course so that he wouldn't be marking her essays. But it's really now the way that men can shield themselves and engage in sexual activity, and advertise their sexuality, their perverse sexualities publicly, in a way that if you then are critical, they can just claim victimhood. And it's just such an obvious. I mean, it's a great ruse, right? I can see why they chose it. But it's just incredible how many people are willing to participate. I mean, how many lesbians will be there? And the reality is none of those lesbians would be willing to sleep with this man or partner with this man or whatever. And yet we're all meant to entertain and pretend the idea that any lesbian would be interested in him, or as if he fucking knows anything about, you know what, this is why I sort of hate this kind of humanist liberal lives rhetoric that's come from America. Sometimes it's like living my feminist life, living a lesbian life, da da da, and it becomes this self narrative that again is just so American, and the rest of the world doesn't have it in this way. And it all comes from being against the frontier, right? 150, 200 years ago, that it's you against the elements and you're making your way in the world as part of the gold rush or whatever it is they were doing at the time. And then this thing of self-narrating is still so strong. And because of American cultural imperialism, we're having to deal with it here. And I hate it, because actually most people are not the best narrators of their lives. And I don't care if a man says he lives a lesbian life. We objectively know he doesn't. And therefore his testimony is null and void. And it goes to show as well whose voices are considered authentic or inauthentic. They've not invited a lesbian to come and talk about her actual lesbian life. I mean, they should bring Kathleen Stock along. some normal lesbian, just a middle of the road, old-fashioned lesbian.
Oh, well, he also famously lashed out against Vancouver Rape Relief, which, for those who don't know, is one of Canada's oldest women's shelters, and was defunded a couple years back due to pressure from trans activists. But as far back as 2008, he was calling it a segregated space. So again, he's been consistently using the rhetoric of opposing racism in order to break down women's boundaries and barriers, and to attack a rape shelter as well. I mean, that's, how low can you go?
Yeah. Also, Vancouver Rape Relief, essentially run by Hilla Kerner, who is a lesbian. So I don't think she's officially the head honcho, but I think she's the longest standing staff member there and has a huge amount of responsibility for the organization. So this guy actually very much is targeting lesbian run organizations. And that's the thing. Yeah, if you destroy lesbian culture, where do then lesbians have anywhere to go? They either kind of trans out of it, as there's so many young women doing on TikTok and Instagram, and you just can hopefully get away from odious men like Susan Stryker by basically saying, no, bro, or I guess you wouldn't say bro, no, sorry, sister, I'm a man, so you wouldn't like me anyway, right? It's just like fleeing these disgusting monsters. Or you kind of just have to take being sexually pressured into accepting these men in your space, and that they're gonna get off on it.
I mean, it's really quite dark when you think of it in the broader perspective of men identifying as women, identifying as lesbians, then pushing lesbians out of womanhood and forcing them to identify as straight, actually. Because didn't that happen with Ellen Page, where when Ellen became Elliot Page, her I think they were actually married. Yeah, Emma Portner, right? So they broke up because in that case, Ellen Page is forcing Emma to basically identify as straight.
Or having to pretend to be bisexual when she's not.
Or sure, yeah, bisexual, yeah. But
yeah. And this happens a lot actually when I know of a couple of other examples when a lesbian married couple, one of them will decide they're a man and they divorce. I think it is probably very much about this conflict of the other one not wanting to be hoodwinked by this nonsense. And you just sort of think, okay, well, this is not the person that I married. I didn't think they bought into a load of bullshit. And it's just so sad. Just yesterday, I got into, it wasn't a dispute. I was really trying to remonstrate with them. It was there's so many of them are from hyper religious backgrounds. And I'm not saying that all religious backgrounds are bad at all, right? It's just that so many of them are from the really strict evangelical backgrounds in America, or Mormon backgrounds, are like clearly very black and white, right? They're not applying religion in an interpretive way or a flexible way or whatever. And so many of them, then it's clearly internalized homophobia. And a lot of them have also experienced sexual abuse. And it's just so obvious. Like, of course you'd want to flee womanhood. Being a girl was terrible. And why would a woman be any better? It's what they're thinking. And this woman was saying, oh, well, she literally said, soon I'm going to have a working dick and balls and be a real man. And I just thought, who in the world has told you this? And I said, please look up Kaden Carter, right, who was a woman that was very popular on Tumblr because she was kind of very handsome. And she, in the end, had 40, I think it was 40 surgeries go wrong. She has a YouTube, or I think the YouTube has ended now, but it's still up. There's clearly someone who's very unwell, you know, some can't sleep without the TV on in the background, huge anxiety, finds it hard to leave the house. And yeah, 39, 40 corrective surgeries, can only piss and shit through a bag, can't go to the bathroom like a normal person, doesn't have a sexual function anymore. The basics of life that everyone doesn't even think twice about have been destroyed for this woman. And I said, you know, please look up Kaden Carter. This woman replied saying, oh, I've looked up thousands of phalloplasties. I just said, well, you're in denial then, please don't do it. And it's so interesting to me how these men are really expanding their sexual possibilities. They are the kind of really low value men that heterosexual women are not interested in because they have nothing to offer. They're the, you know, video game and porn addicts that still live in their mom's basement. They're incels. They look creepy. I bet they're socially terrible, right? They can't talk to women normally at all. They then are using this thing of, well, I'm not just a kind of omega male anymore. I'm the top of the woman hierarchy. Lots of women will want to speak to me because it's the social currency involved in it, and maybe I can guilt some into sex. So they're expanding their sexual possibilities, whereas lesbians are just closing them down. I was speaking to a friend from Vancouver where she estimates about a quarter of young women under 30 have had mastectomies, who some just have non-binary identities, right? They're not even claiming to be men, but it's just a trend, to be honest, just like a fashion thing. But the reality is that most people are really normie, really normative. And as soon as, you know, a lot of people would find out like, oh, you chopped your breasts off, that'll be it. They won't want to have a second coffee with you. They won't be interested in pulling you on a night out or settling down with you. These women are basically making it so their only future partners will be each other. And it will be those women in their local community that did this. And I'm sure in the future there'll be support groups, and that will basically be their dating scene. And yeah, if you do decide to have, so, you know, bottom surgery, quote unquote, you're destroying your sexual function for life. So there's like direct physical and social destruction of lesbian possibilities with each other, in, you know, romantic possibilities in the future. Whereas these odious men's who should just die virgins, like, let's be clear, these odious men are upping the possibility of encounters with women. And it's just so sick.
Consider as like the homosexual, transsexual then also expands their dating pool, or attempts to anyway, by including straight men or GAMPs or whatever you call them. But it in both senses, it expands the dating pool for men only, specifically. But also there was a line in Janice Raymond's book, The Transsexual Empire, and these are not her words. She's quoting something that someone else said, okay, because these words are a little bit offensive, but it said in regards to the transsexual surgeries, or what's now called bottom surgeries, the saying was, it's easier to make a hole than a pole. Again, these are not her words. It came from somebody else saying it. And it's true. When you think about the history of these surgeries, clearly they were designed for men, right? So all of these kinds of procedures were about removing something. Then getting that extended over to women, where, by the way, it seems to me that there's much more pressure for women to get mastectomies than there is for men to do anything about their functioning genitalia at all. But maybe that's just my perception, that there's more pressure on women to kind of self-mutilate, as it were, than there is for men, who are just we're supposed to accept that a guy with a beard who puts on some lipstick is just totally 100% a woman. And then you have these young girls going out for double mastectomies in order to pass as men. And there's just a huge double standard there. But yeah, I mean, you can't construct an organ. That's not a place where we are. That's Frankenstein levels of delusion and
also it will never happen. Like, this is the nonsense that kind of pseudo leftists that I used to hang around with sort of half a decade plus years ago, they'd talk about this kind of, it's a transhumanism really, but as if technology is going to mean in the future, they'd say things like, oh, we're all going to change sex for the weekend. The body doesn't work like this. Every time I've had an operation, and I've only had 2 or 3 in my life, 2 of the 3, I've had an infection, because it's not that it didn't go well. It's just that when you mess around with something and you have a wound, there's always these risks of things going wrong. Your body's not actually, as you can see, with Hollywood and the people that get cosmetic surgery on top of cosmetic surgery again and again and again and again over decades. I guess a classic example is Michael Jackson, whose nose kind of looked like it was going to collapse. It's not true that the body is just infinitely malleable and that you can just say, oh yeah, well, we're just going to change this and change it back. And if you don't like your mastectomy when you hit 35 and you're not getting as many likes on social media, you can just get a boob job. And then, that will take so much upkeep as well as you get older. And it's just really odd to me that, I suppose it's that thing of women not feeling in their bodies, which is not something that I am very familiar with, but I've heard it described enough that I think I really understand it. And therefore they don't feel integrated anyway. Because for me, I'd think, no, my body's precious. I'm not messing around with it. Like, I'm not going to do anything that, is risk taking if I don't have to. But if you already are so disassociated from your body, if anything, you think, oh, I might feel more integrated afterwards when I, don't have my breasts, which I hate. And I find it, obviously men aren't going to chop off the organ that gives them their symbolic power in society, and that they, maybe enjoy sexual activity with. Again, these men tend to be incels. But, I always thought as a feminist, I can't believe that I'm on the side of not chopping knobs off. I always thought I'd be fully for it. But actually, in the sober light of day, I really don't think anyone should do anything like that with their genitals if I'm really pressed on the matter. But I think it's just that women's bodies are so hated. And if you don't have, porn star style breasts, these kind of orbs that they have. I mean, the fashion changed. Before it was more like football ones, but now it's these kind of orbs that look like you could park a bus between. If you don't have those kind of breasts, then your breasts are disgusting, and get rid of them. And have these kind of scars for life. And I find it really incredible to meet. They're not even that young, some of them, but, women in their late 20s that are genuinely duped by this. And I've met some of them who regret it, and they'll say, oh, it hurts so much afterwards. And I was really surprised. I just thought, you thought a major operation wasn't going to hurt after.
I recently learned through TikTok, by the way, if you browse the top surgery tag on TikTok, there's just so many of these videos. But I recently learned that after the surgery, it is typical for the nipples to atrophy and fall off, so that you often then need to get another kind of touch up on your nipples afterwards. And that somebody had actually posted a video of this happening, where they're all, they turn black. It's like a scab. It's just, why would you think that doesn't hurt? I don't understand how you could look at this and see a major surgery and think, oh, all right, then that's going to be fine and no problem, no pain or anything. I mean, of course, I feel tremendously terrible for the girls and the women who are going through this. But it does go back again to that idea of woman as masochist, which is deeply rooted in these gender concepts, the sadist as the masculine and the feminine as masochism.
Well, I think as well, it's to do with a little bit of, my theory again is a bit of a Marxist one, to do with commodity fetishism and the acceleration of consumable experiences. So, I buy something, it arrives. God, I bought something on Amazon the other day at 6 a.m. It had arrived by 9 a.m. It's just incredible. And I think that people think, oh, well, I can just, have these procedures at the drop of a hat, then that'll be it. It'll be done. Just like if I was to buy some socks. I mean, that's not what they'd articulate, but I think it's a sense that they have. And then they must be very shocked. I mean, again, Elliot Page, one of her nipples looks like it's basically in her armpit. The lack of care. I would do a better job. If they were like, Jen, you're coming in, you're placing Elliot Page's nipples, I wouldn't have put one near her armpit. I would have maybe Googled, where are nipples on men? Looked up a few male torsos and gone, oh, they're a lot lower and in the middle than that. But these people that are taking this money, you know, from women, these surgeons, they do not care. They just so obviously do not give a fuck.
Can I just say one thing here too as well? Pornography. I always try to talk about this whenever possible, because pornography, right? So these girls, well, I mean, this generation in general is being brought up on streaming often violent, hardcore pornography, but these surgeries, most of them were basically pioneered through the sex industry, through the pornography industry. So you have the fake breasts. Well, if you're watching a lot of pornography and perhaps even as a young woman watching this kind of pornography, and then you see these orbs that you described earlier, the fake, and then you look at your own body, you're comparing your natural body. So the standard has become the man-made artificial body, and then the natural body is now the one seen to be as deviant or strange.
Yeah, 100%. And the idea that, I think it's that sense that, I suppose this is what I meant by the frenetic, accelerated rate of commodity acquisition, is that you can just book in and go. Whereas, again, one of the things I try to say on TikTok to women who want, a lot of the time they'll have very female body fat distributions. So you know what I mean by that? I mean like jiggly bits, like bums, hips, boobs, you know, and they don't want that because they want to have a much more masculine physique. And so they say, oh no, I'm going to get a mastectomy and then I'm going to get lipo and da-da-da. And I say, look, you know, it's a suggestion that is probably obvious, but if you went to the gym and if you had a protein high diet and you really lost body fat, it's like when Geri Halliwell, I think, probably became almost anorexic in the 90s. She was always known for having these huge breasts, and then she just became almost like an 11-year-old boy's body, right? Like it went way too far, but it's because she'd lost body fat, and actually breasts are body fat. And I say, you know, why don't you just become a bit of a gym bro, especially if you claim to be a man. Gym bro is a very recognized type of man, right? Become a gym bro and, you know, go to the gym and get ripped and whatever it is people do, drink loads of protein. And I think that there is a real just people really balk at the idea that, well, I would have a project that's even a year or 2 years long, where I would do something long term when I think I can do it instantaneously by just paying. And, you know, it's like Elliot Page and the abs, that I think she's had abs inserted. She's very thin, so they may well be real, but women don't tend to have abs that look like that when they do have abs. I mean, she's obviously eating massively under calorie deficit in order to avoid having any body fat. Because, you know, as well, there was the trans protest last year, and I saw what a mastectomy looks like when the person puts on weight after they've had it. So they've had their breast body fat chopped off and then they've gained weight. You just end up looking like you have square breasts without nipples. You just look like you have bricks, basically, like weird flobby bricks. I mean, I know it's a horrible way of putting it, but this person was walking around without their top on. And I just thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. Of course that would happen. You don't actually change a human being's body fat distribution. So of course this person gained a bit of weight and they've now got breasts again. Just really unusual looking ones. They don't look like men. You know, when men gain weight, they don't even look like that. It was just really strange sight to see. And I thought, oh, well, that's what they'll all look like when they're like middle-aged women and stop caring about what they look like on Instagram kind of thing.
Well, that's another good point, because I mean, I've heard, I don't know that I can actually point to a source on this, but that in middle age, many of the women who identify as men might reduce or stop taking testosterone just because of the tremendous detrimental impact it has on on your health, right? So in a sense, it does seem to be I mean, well, obviously very cosmetically driven.
Yeah. The young women all seem to stop taking it after 30, and especially after 35, because honestly, you just get less attention on social media after that point. You're not really in a youth culture scene anymore. It mirrors actually the disappearance of women generally after 35, when they stop being as attractive to men. So they're like, oh, well, these are women are, they have lower value now. It really replicates that. And I think most of them do. I think the ones that start taking hormones later, I don't know if you start in your middle age, maybe you give up as a pensioner. But yeah, I from my own experiences of watching people do this from university onwards, it definitely is the case that I think the effects of testosterone become too toxifying, and there's just not as many rewards. Everyone has already done the congratulations dance. You've already been given a job as a trans officer at a charity. And after that, you can just stop having to take hormones every week, and just go back to saying, oh, I'm non-binary. They detransition to non-binary. You still have the effects of testosterone on voice, which I think a lot of women, that's what they seem to want. And you still have the mastectomy. A really big shame is your hair doesn't grow back. And I really feel like I don't like to make things about looks, especially around women, because women are already I don't want to say hyper pleased, made to feel shit about everything to do with their bodies and looks. But I really wish I could explain to so many of these women that they go from being like really beautiful, like lesbians, to really average or below average looking men. It's like, I know you want the status. I know you want to be invisible. I know you mean that it means like you can walk on the street and be less afraid. But, I posted a thing on Getter where I put Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic at like 21, looking like angelic and beautiful and really very feminine, actually. And then I put a picture of him in his recent film, Look Up, at 47. And I just said, lesbians before and after testosterone. And that's really what I think they look like. And I actually don't understand why their vanity doesn't get to them, because it would me. I'd be like, no, my hair is one of my best assets. I'm not thinning my hair for any reason. But I just think that for them, it's really, they just feel so strongly about it. And I think that people seem to really think they're going to get a lot out of it. And I think it takes a few cycles on social media and in real life when you start to realize whatever you thought was going to happen, some momentous change in your life, just isn't there anymore. And so many of them, again, it was this woman I was trying to convince yesterday to not have a phalloplasty over TikTok. How convincing can a stranger be? But I was really trying to be careful with my words and really thoughtful and reaching out. And I was like, I understand exactly how you feel and why you feel that way, and But she was talking about actually how hard it is and how horrible it is to transition. And one of the things I said was, so do you not sometimes think, I think a lot of them, they really do. I think the regret sets in quite soon. She was 28 and she just said that she can't go to the bathroom in public. She's really worried about it. She said she doesn't feel confident enough to have a partner. So again, shut down of lesbian sexuality. She doesn't know when to come out to people or not, and is always worried about people outing, quote unquote. Again, they've like appropriated and derived this from gay culture, right? Like whether she doesn't know what circumstances she should say she used to be a woman or not. And she just said she'd lost loads of friends about it. I imagine friends that had tried to say to her, don't do this. And then you just have to kind of block and deny that the person exists. And yeah, I could see already, and she kept doing this thing that they do, and Posey Parker noticed this actually. They post lots of pictures of themselves as little girls, and it's because they're starting to regret it. That I think that's a real sign, and I think Posey Parker's right when she identified that. And I wrote on this woman, and she kind of put a series of pictures up, and I was like, oh, you were a really beautiful child. And she liked the comment, and I just thought, come on, like, she was a really very nice looking woman before, and I'm not being rude, but now she just looks like a bald, like breastless potato. She just looks terrible. Like as a man, it's like, I'm sorry, but like a 5'3" man who doesn't, like just like has lost all his hair by 28. I don't know. I don't want to make it about aesthetics, but I know that for them it matters. So I sometimes try to cover those bases, be like, yes, you have very beautiful eyes, but actually you went from about an 8 out of 10 on the lesbian ranking to like a 2 out of 10 on the hetero man ranking.
I mean, that makes sense. You're doing something unnatural to your body. And what I find hypocritical, so much of this is hypocritical, but the men have no qualms with saying that it is about aesthetics for them. They brag about it even. So there are men who treat estrogen as a form of body modification even. You can find in the forums about them talking about microdosing estrogen. And they'll talk about things like, to prevent hair loss, to get what they call girl skin, to deal with acne, to try to reverse wrinkles and signs of aging. Well, I mean, testosterone does age people faster. That's true. And so they're not incorrect in noticing that taking estrogen can have a sort of youthful effect. But they're very open about doing it as a kind of glow up or like a makeover. Like it's very obvious.
Yeah. It's because for men talking about those things, if anything, people will pretend they're great looking when they're not, right? Like disgusting looking men in like a woman's like nightie will kind of, a really portly 56-year-old will put himself in this negligee on the internet, and women will say, oh, you look so beautiful and you should try purple eyeshadow. So they're just never made to feel bad about how they look. And there's just no self-consciousness around the body in the same way. Whereas women, there's so much self-consciousness, and it's so present in the kind of quote unquote trans man, trans mask, non-binary world for women, that so much of it is very clearly about how they look and wanting to look a particular way. And it's just such a shame that I think so many of them think it's a reversible experiment, and it's not. I mean, as you say, so many of them age dramatically after taking testosterone. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I know that they think it's a bad thing because they fully buy into the conventions of society, actually, and which is why they're doing this in the first place. And they are not happy with the aging effects. It's very clear. Whereas, for men, this is just like gender is a playground, and for women, it's hell, hell on earth. So that's always seems to mirror that. So of course, men could do it for aesthetics, and no one will be critical or say to them, oh, why don't you just try and be less ugly, matey, or like be insulting, you know what I mean? Whereas for women, and they're so isolated, this whole thing of making a TikTok every day or whatever it is, I just think, I mean, how many people are you speaking to if you really need to speak to that many people through the internet? There's so many issues around isolation. And then what happens is they disappear, and that's when they've detransitioned. So the other comment I sometimes leave is, when you detransition, because I never say if, I like, when you detransition, will you document that as well? Some of them say, yes, I will. Yes, if that happens, yes, I will, like being kind of defiant about it. I'm like, okay, good. So they know it's a possibility already. But I just don't believe that there will be anyone in nursing homes shooting up testosterone into their backsides once a week, like calling themselves Biff, pretending to be a bloke. Because at that point, your life is pretty much over. No disrespect to people in nursing homes. You've had a great chunk of your life already. And there just wouldn't be a reason to do it, because I don't believe they are just doing it because this is really who I am. It's that they think the world will be much better and I'll be received much better if I do this. And I think the opposite is true, and they don't realize till they've ran that experiment for at least a decade, and then they detransition.
Like you said, gender is a playground for men and torture for women. I wanted to just quickly mention how we know well documented in every country of the world, pretty much, that women live longer than men on average. And part of that is it's got to do with hormones. It's got to do with estrogen. I mean, it's many things, but it's got to do with estrogen as well. So men taking estrogen, then now I'm not sure that this is the case, but I mean, I know it helps them aesthetically to not lose hair and so on. Whether it helps them live longer, I'm not quite clear on that. But we know for a fact that the effects of testosterone on women are just nightmarish. So the men are kind of, they're in so many ways, men are getting this boost up from transitioning or from taking the wrong sex hormones. And then in so many ways, women are getting really screwed over from doing the same sort of thing.
Medical conditions, was it atrophy, womb atrophy, all kinds of I mean, it's not even just that testosterone itself, you know, having higher testosterone as a woman probably doesn't do that much, but taking huge amounts synthetically, it's not even good for men. I mean, look at Joe Rogan, right? And he has this they call it TRT gut, where he has a kind of sticky out stomach now, basically.
Sorry, TRT gut, testosterone
placement therapy gut, and it's where men, as they get older, lose testosterone, so they take more. And the effect is, I mean, if you Google a picture of Joe Rogan topless, you'll see it. It means that the stomach, which is actually above your navel, people think it's not, but like he's got something, you know, living in there or whatever. But clearly he thinks it's worth it to just have, you know, the same muscles he had when he was younger, and, you know, have a particularly macho physique or whatever it is he wants. But the point is just this experimental laissez-faire attitude towards drugs. It's not really good for anyone, unless, yeah, like Joe Rogan, you make a trade-off. I'm sure he was probably informed about it. Make a trade-off that it's worth it. But most people are not making any kind of informed decision, and they're not even the age where that would be possible a lot of the time. I just find it such a shame that then those women go and hide and they don't then talk about it on social media. And it's because, of course, there would be a huge avalanche of a backlash against them. And then there's men who don't even so-called transition in the first place, and they just get to live with their fetish forever, becoming like dirty old men rather than dirty young men. And for women, it's just, yeah, and it's the vast majority of them are lesbians. It's like such a crying shame. And even that you notice this trend of, yeah, the destruction of lesbian sexuality, how many lesbians are getting banned off dating apps simply for saying that they're interested in a female, another female.
Holly Lawford Smith got in trouble,
yeah.
Didn't she?
I think she's banned off about her 4th dating app by now, which is incredible, right? Because I don't even think you get banned for sending people lurid messages. Like initially, you probably just get reprimanded. Whereas if you just put on your profile, oh, I'm a lesbian, I'm only interested in lesbians, and that, to my understanding, is a female who's exclusively interested in other women, you just get, you know, immediately ejected from the site and from lesbian dating apps. I think recently she got banned off Her, which is, as the name implies, is just for, I think, lesbian and bisexual women. But it is really odd. I mean, unless you go on these sites, you don't realize how true it is. But it is. There's so many men calling themselves women on there, and then men just calling themselves like Steve, like just men on there, that are like not making any effort. And then like straight couples saying, oh, we're looking for a third. Are any of you ladies interested? Right? Like just like sleazy stuff. 1 in 7 profile pictures, you might actually see what might be an actual lesbian. But that's the thing, like, honestly, I kind of went on these dating apps a bit in the past, a couple of years ago, and I knew really to be discreet. I knew not to say this kind of thing. And the thing that I would sometimes put is GCRF, and then other women would recognize it, in fact, and be like, oh, you're a radical feminist as well. And I became friends a bit with a woman that just lives like across the park from me, who was also on there and recognized this combination of letters. So yeah, it is. It's just a total shutdown. And it's such an enforcement of kind of the closing down of lesbian connections and enforcing of lesbian isolation, which is always what lesbians are smeared with, right? Certainly, I used to notice narratives of lesbophobia were basically, oh, why would you want to be a lesbian? You'll end up on your own and unhappy. And I remember 2 years ago, I actually didn't do it in the end because they freaked me out so much. I don't know if you saw the story on my Facebook. I wrote about it. These two gay men that I was meant to dog sit for. These two men. I didn't do it. They really creeped me out in the end. Anyway, one of the things they said is oh yeah, we've got a lesbian neighbor. Or at least I think she's lesbian. And then I said, oh, why do you think she's lesbian? And they said, oh, she doesn't go out. She doesn't have any friends. And that's what people think a lesbian is. It's just like a lonely woman.
Oh, then I'm like a gold star.
Well, Genevieve, I'm glad you've taken the opportunity to come out today. What a momentous occasion.
I love staying home. It's so great.
Well, there you go.
That's really sad.
It is sad. This stereotype that is used to police women from being lesbians, if they are, right, to kind of stop them realizing that. So the conclusion is there's been a terrible start of the year. Things are not getting better in 2022 just yet.
Right. It's only been a few weeks and here we are.
It's not even the last week of January yet.
Yeah. And I have trouble keeping up as well. I mean, there's just so much all the time. One thing I did want to quickly mention, though, is that New York is now looking to go the route of California in terms of allowing convicted male offenders to self-ID into prisons. So again, here you have California and New York being kind of the leaders on this brave new world, this frontier.
They're probably going to have a speaking tour of universities about it with a roster of paedophiles. You're not actually allowed on the stage unless you are a convicted paedophile. They're not interested in advocacy from any other group. This is now this is not just an emboldened group. This is like an admired and
we joke about it, but it really is discouraging. How many of these cases are we going to have to point out before people start to realize or oppose this? Or I shouldn't say that. People are opposing it, but what I mean is how many cases are we going to have before this madness stops? How many women have to get raped in prison? What is the number? When is this going to matter enough?
Yeah, the problem is no one cares about women in prison. So I almost imagine if half the women's prison population was being raped, I'm not sure anyone would really care.
Well, that's the thing. Actually, the women in US prisons are constantly sexually abused because what they do is they allow men to be prison guards and prison staff. And this results in mass abuse, even systemic abuse. In some cases, the guards have been found to be pimping women, literally pimping them, or targeting them for becoming sex trafficked after they're released from prison, things like this. So they're already abusing women in prison. That's just been going on and on, unchallenged. So now we're just making it worse. So the solution should not be to add more men into women's prisons.
And there just shouldn't really even be women's prisons, really. I mean, in this country, there is hardly any women in prison for the kind of crimes that you might think someone might need prison for, like a violent crime. The vast majority, it's poor women not able to pay their council tax or pay their TV license bill, and just haven't managed to avoid the inspectors that come around to your house to see whether you've got a telly or not. And it's a shame, but I think that because they are so vulnerable and marginalized already, really, to end up in prison, it is true that the case here of, is it Karen? Am I making this up that his name is Karen? The guy that sexually assaulted. Yeah, Karen White. That's
Karen White.
I do think that did seem to do something. And I know that one of his victims gave an interview to the Daily Mail recently. And I do think that that has meant that there probably won't be a legislative change here in the way that trans activists want. But yeah, I do wonder how much, but this is the thing, that it always reaches an eventual critical mass point of recognition. So it's like all the paedophilia stuff about 7 years ago here that came forward about MPs, like one MP, Lord Janner, who's now dead, thank God, was like raping children in the chapel in Parliament, and all the Jimmy Savile stuff and the hundreds of now adults that came forward. I do think that there is a point where, like a boiling point, where it's that societal recognition, and that must come at a certain stage, whether that comes due to the wave of victims becoming so great, or the numbers of campaigners, you know, you, me, and everyone else that highlights this kind of thing becoming so great that then there is some recognition. But I imagine it can't be. These things happen in cycles, and my hope is this is a generational cycle, and that in the future this will just be very much similar to McCarthyism, where everyone pretends they were against it the whole time, and of course they weren't. They were dobbing in their neighbours to the authorities. But I can't wait to get to that day quick enough, so I want to know how to accelerate it. How do we get to that in 2 years rather than in a decade? Because it's just terrifying to ever think about something like having children, and then them being subject to this stuff in schools. I mean, thank goodness it's not like North America and Canada. Sorry, yeah, America and Canada here yet. But it is just I feel very sorry for young people growing up on the internet nowadays. And on that happy note, until next time.
I was going to say, to hasten the awareness, you can check out Redux. That's REDUXX, where we'll be covering this on a regular basis. Redux is a feminist news site that I have co-founded with Anna Slatz. You can find our website at reduxwith2x's.org and on Twitter at reduxmag.